Could you please elaborate on the 4 ways of knowing?
Sure. So the idea about a taxonomy, it has to be principled. And so what it is every one of these kinds of knowing has a particular vehicle, a particular result, a particular standard, and a particular kind of memory. So I'm not going through all of these things to be pedantic. I'm going through these to show that this is a rigorous taxonomy, that this is like, because you can cut up the world however you want, but in the scientific taxonomy, you want it to be very systematic and rigorous. So the kind of knowing we're most familiar with and our culture is very fixated on is propositional knowing. This is knowing that something is the case. This is knowing that cats are mammals, knowing that 2 + 2 = 4. And the standard of realness for that is truth. You're convinced that something is true, and it results in beliefs. You get true beliefs, and perhaps they become true justified beliefs, etc. And the kind of memory that's associated with that is called semantic memory. So, for example, if I ask you, do you remember learning that cats are mammals? Can you tell me the day that really dropped for you? And you go, I don't know, right? That's semantic memory. And the reason why I'm saying this is all of these memories are distinct from each other, such that like it's possible to damage one without the others being completely damaged. So the next is procedural knowing. This is knowing how. This is knowing how to kiss someone. This is knowing how to kick a ball. This is knowing how to swim, right? And this doesn't result in beliefs. Right? This results in skills. And skills aren't true or false. Tim, do you know how to swim?
I do.
Right. Now, is swimming true or false right now? No, you're misunderstanding. Skills aren't true or false. They apply or they don't, and they apply powerfully or they don't. And so its standard of realness is powered. Does our know-how empower us? And then, prosaically enough, psychologists call the form of memory associated with this procedural memory. Right?
Yeah.
Now, each one of these, I'm going in an order of dependence. The propositional depends on the procedural, and we can get into that in a minute, but I'll just go through the 4 first. The next is perspectival knowing. This is knowing what it's like to be. So you know what it's like to be you now in your state of mind in this situation. You know what you're foregrounding, you know what you're backgrounding, you know what is salient for you. You can sense how the salience is shifting around. You got a sense of how you're fitted to this situation. And this doesn't result in skills or beliefs, it results in perspectives. And you know how to take perspectives, and you know what the difference between perspectives are, and how valuable it is to have multi-perspectives on a situation. Sometimes in order to solve a problem, you shift to a different perspective. And so perspectives aren't true or false, they're not powerful or not. Their standard of realness is presence. How present are you in the situation? And in fact, when people do VR work, they look for this. How much do people feel like they're in the game, right? That's the perspectival knowing, right? That they're really situated in it, that they really belong to it, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And this has its own kind of memory called episodic memory. So I can ask you perhaps, do you remember what you did on your last birthday?
Right.
And what you'll do is you'll remember a particular perspective you had on a particular situation and your state of mind in that situation. That's your episodic memory. Now below that, and this gets to what we were talking about earlier, is participatory knowing. This is knowing by being. This is the kind of knowing that results from how you and reality have been co-shaped to fit together to generate those affordances. So for example, the water bottle and I have both been shaped by gravity. We've both been shaped by electromagnetism so that there's an affordance there. We've both been shaped, right, by a biological history, which is niche construction. My ancestors evolved, they made tools that shaped the environment that shaped my ancestors, right? And culture has shaped me in this, technology made this, and taught me how to drink out of a water bottle. So there's been all this co-shaping of me and parts of the environment so we fit together, we're niche together, we belong together, affordances are available to me. That's carried in this very weird sense of memory that you probably don't even recognize. It's your sense of self. The sense of all of the identities you've taken up and how they're somehow historically, narratively linked together to certain narrative histories of certain situations. So here's the proposal. You have participatory knowing, it's laying out affordances, and when that's missing, you know it. Culture shock, or when you're homesick, or when you're lonely. right? That participatory knowing.
And John, could you just define affordances?
Yeah, affordances are like the graspability. The affordances are real relations for how you can interact with the object, how that object is available to you. So this affords graspability. The water bottle is graspable. That's an affordance, a real relation of fittedness. So me and the water bottle belong together. It makes itself available for certain interactions, and I can shape myself to interact with it powerfully and appropriately. Did that work as an explanation?
It did work. Could you perhaps give an example of an affordance that would come into play with culture shock?
So an affordance would come into play with culture shock is there are certain affordances about how you and other people relate that tell you when conversation is available to you, when there's an affordance for conversation. And notice that most of this is unconscious for you. Notice even within your own culture. So Tim, how close should you stand to somebody at a funeral?
I was just thinking about the body spacing because I was just in Japan where it's very, very different.
Right.
I couldn't give you a discrete number, but there's probably a feeling associated with it where it goes from comfortable to uncomfortable.
Right. And you've got that sense of, right. And it wasn't working in Japan, right? And
very
so
different.
that way of connecting to people by shaping the literal personal space between you and them was not available to you. That affordance wasn't there. Does that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So the affordances are here, and then the perspectival knowing makes certain affordances salient to me, grabbing my attention, arousing my metabolism. The floor is walkable for me right now, but I don't need to walk right now. So it's not something that I'm paying attention to, right?
Yeah.
But I bring it into my situational awareness with the perspectival knowing. That situational awareness tells me which skills I should activate, which procedural knowing. And then the procedural knowing puts me into the causal relationships with the world that give me the evidence for my beliefs. So that's all the kinds of knowing. And the point is, outside of the propositional, these other kinds of knowing are built on the way you are coupled to the environment, dynamically coupled to the environment. And therefore, they hearken back to that participation, that contact we were talking about.
Right. And I suppose it's this coupling and interaction with the environment on a few different levels, in the sense that you have your sort of skin encapsulated ego and its interaction with what we perceive as external elements. And then you have perhaps those who think of mind and body in this Cartesian dualistic way. You have the interaction of the body with the mind, which in some respects is the entire reason for which the brain evolved.
Right.
Let me just come back to semantic memory. Could you give just another example of semantic memory? Because I don't think I grasped that.
Oh, so like if I ask you, are dogs fishes? And what do you say to me?
I say no. That's
semantic memory. Did anybody ever sit you down? Do you remember it? Do you have an episodic memory of, I remember when I learned that dogs weren't fishes, right? Yeah. So it's not bound up with your particular perspective on a situation or the state of mind you are in. It is this abstracted fact. And that's what propositions are about. They're about these abstracted facts.